Hello and welcome to Faith Matters. This is the programme where we look at Liverpool life through the prism of faith, belief and spirituality. This is a special hour-long edition, and our theme for today is 50 Shades of Grey, where we're looking at the book and the film and the sequel by E.L. James. I've got that right, haven't I? And the guests in the studio today are Dr. Mary Hughes Edwards, who's a reader in English literature from Edge Hill University. Dr. Kate Lister, who's a lecturer in English literature from Leeds Trinity University, formerly of Edge Hill. And Susie Murray, who's a former student from Edge Hill University, Mary's student. So welcome. I think I've got all your names right there, that's good. Okay, Mary, Kate, you're both lecturers in English literature. So what prompted your interest in 50 Shades of Grey, and how have you pursued this interest?
I suppose that I'm interested in it because some of my primary areas of study is sexuality, gender, and how those both things are conceived and constructed in popular culture and socially. And 50 Shades of Grey, whether you like it or loathe it, is a global phenomenon. So it's very interesting to me to try and research why that might be. What's it tapping into? What are people taking away from it? What are people enjoying about it or hating about it? That's the bit that I'm interested in. And I've lectured on a module that Mary established that uses 50 Shades of Grey to explore themes of heterosexuality and how that works and how the genders relate to one another. So that's very much how I'm interested in it.
Yeah, and I think whether you like it or you loathe it, you can't really ignore it if you work in the field of gender and sexuality studies in a contemporary context. I came at it kind of from a slightly sort of different angle in that my training and my doctorate and my early research life as an academic was based on medieval constructions of the body and of sexuality and of enclosure of the body. Actually, I looked at anchoritism in the Middle Ages, but
You've lost me already.
I lost you already. No, I haven't. The practice of medieval solitude, being alone for the Lord, and of the kinds of things you can do to your body in the name of God, in essence.
So flagellation and all that kind of stuff?
At its most extreme, but ascetic practice generally as an inculcation of discipline. So I was quite intrigued by that in terms of medieval theology. But my own teaching is very much in modern literature more and more these days.
So you set this module up at Edge Hill?
Yes, at Edge Hill Uni in the third year, the final year, we do a module called Sexuality and Subversion, which looks at dissident sexualities, same-sex desire, and I just thought it was actually our first straight text on that module, 50 Shades of Grey. I just did it last year for the first time when Susie was doing it.
So by straight, you mean heterosexual?
Heterosexual, yeah.
Okay.
And so we decided to look at that in order to take a little look at how BDSM was being constructed textually.
What's BDSM again?
Bondage, dominance, sadomasochism, submission.
Okay. Right. Okay.
It's a wide umbrella term for a whole host of different practices.
Okay, so Susie, you were on this module.
Yeah.
And enjoy it?
Yeah, it was. It's kind of being like a graduate now, like kind of talking to other English literature students as well. Like talking about what modules I did at uni. I go, oh yes, I did this sexuality subversion module, and everyone's going, what was that? And I'm like, yeah, we read 50 Shades of Grey or this, and they were really kind of like, not like astounded, but going, that sounds so much more interesting than kind of some of the modules that I did. I did at uni.
Stopping with Philip Larkin.
Yeah.
Or such, yeah.
Pretty
That's
much.
the kind of thing I did when I was
So it's really interesting. I think it's kind of really kind of like sparked my interest in, wanting to kind of study something like that a bit further and kind of pick it apart a bit more. So.
As a feminist, I was extremely worried that it was so popular. That was my first thought. I wanted to look at it to see whether it was as bad as some of the hype was suggesting it was, how it was constructing power relations, why those kinds of constructions should still be so appealing en masse to young women, and what, as a feminist, that meant feminism needed to do, really. I
Yeah,
think
what-
that was something you were interested in, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The messages that people are taking away from it. What's it reaffirming? What's it suggesting to a very, very wide readership?
And have feminists addressed it?
Oh yes, quite a lot. They've had conferences. You know?
Right.
50 Shades of Feminism is
50
a
Shades of
critical
Feminism.
text
And-
now, yeah,
and
and,
you-
that's
you've-
an interesting
You've been to
text.
some of these conferences?
We've
Or?
been to some conferences that have addressed it, yeah.
Interdisciplinary Press did a conference on sexuality. I think it was last year, and many of the papers were addressing 50 Shades of Grey and what it was saying. And just because it's such a huge global phenomenon, it can't be ignored.
No,
I think,
absolutely.
but it's certainly being mulled over in feminism, gender studies.
And if it can be used to inspire new generations of feminists, then it's got to be a positive, I think.
And
That's
new
gotta be a
readers
positive
as
thing.
well. There's obviously people, we're not, our culture is a particularly visual culture. We don't perhaps read as much as we did in the past in the Western world. I don't know, but maybe it's inspiring people to read.
It's also led to the creation of some book clubs and of some sexuality discussion groups. It's got sexuality very much mainstream as a conversation, and the acceptability of discussing sexual issues, which is not something, I mean, it's an American, it's very popular in America too, but thinking just in a British, perhaps even an English context, we're not terribly good at discussing these kinds of issues
They kind of stiff up a
openly.
lip and
Yeah.
we're kind of private, aren't
I
we?
mean, I'm not English, I'm Welsh. I'll just get that in.
I
but
think Scousers are different, actually.
Celts and Scousers
So it's
are
the-
more
it's the Celtic.
comfortable with their own passions. But I think it's a good thing if we're starting with what's positive about it. There's a lot that isn't positive, but if we're starting with the positives, then it has opened up. Yeah, in public spaces and places as well. If you see someone reading it, you go, oh, what do you think of it? And then you have a debate you would not have had if they hadn't been reading that text.
And it kind of brings out sort of more intimate things that people might be doing in the bedroom into open day discussion, and I think it makes it more acceptable. It's not quite as taboo as perhaps it once might have been. I think, and that's a good
I'm going to come on
thing.
to that later. But Susie, what do you think makes it so popular? Did you read it before you had to study it?
No, I
Oh,
was
that's
kind of quite
interesting.
set against reading it. I
You were
think,
set
before.
against reading
Yeah,
it?
I kind of was
Made
like,
her
I'm
read
not going to read it, and I kind of thought,
Why?
Well, I just thought, well, I'm not going to read that. It's it's trash, and I kind of knew that it kind of had its base in fan fiction, so it kind of started as something else on the internet, and in a community where she was kind of publishing that herself, and I just thought, I don't hold this to a very high standard, which I think might be
Fan fiction's awesome.
yeah,
it's a democratic
so
genre.
it was a little bit kind of pretentious, I think, perhaps, but I think, and I don't think I necessarily enjoyed it as a text, but I thought it raised so many issues. It was so interesting, and it kind of really got me thinking, and I was really kind of enthusiastic in class talking about it, and I always just had so much to say, like I couldn't shut up, and I had notes. So yeah.
And so what's made it so popular, do you think?
There's a whole host of reasons for that. Some of them are sexual and some of them aren't. The ones that aren't are the ones I'm more interested in. My big theory is that what people really fall for and are really bewitched by is the capitalist fantasy.
Yeah.
It's the luxury.
Right,
It's
okay.
him as a billionaire
27-year-old billionaire, no less.
and the lifestyle that entails. And that's another reason why things like Millionaire
Is he
Matchmaker...
Russian, actually? He's not Russian.
Russian
no.
oligarch. No.
Yeah.
Owns a football team. No.
No, he's an
No one's
American
quite
kid.
sure what he does. It's a business acquisition merger
Yeah,
thing. It's all a bit
vague.
flaky.
And there are some moments where his philanthropy is hinted at as well, actually.
yeah.
But yeah, I think it's capitalist fantasy first and foremost. And that's what's
It
really
wouldn't have
bewitching.
the same appeal if he was a dustbin man from Hull, would it?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well, I confess, I haven't read it.
I tried to make you read
You
it,
did
didn't
try to
I?
make
Did I
me
fail?
read it. You failed, and I haven't seen
So
the film.
far.
I keep now seeing the film, thinking I ought to look at
Don't
this.
see the
really.
film, it's terrible.
Now, I don't want this to sound sexist because I know you're all feminists, and I've upset you already by calling you girls before the show. But it just seems to me this is kind of chick lit with a bit of spice added to it. Is that fair?
There's nothing wrong with chick lit. Chick lit is a perfectly acceptable popular culture
I think you
genre.
need to define a bit what chick lit
But I don't think it is
means.
chick lit particularly. Yeah. Should we make Reverend
Do you know-
Hitchman define chick lit?
Yeah, we
for
could
us?
do that. But
Well,
when
it's a kind of books for girls.
books for girls,
Um,
ones with pink covers on.
But men
Yeah,
are buying this book too.
Men. So
Yeah.
is it for men?
You see,
Yeah. I mean,
you
what?
see men and women reading
You know, when I
it.
first encountered this text, and it was sort of, there was a big hype about it, and I kept hearing people go, 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades of Grey. The term that kept coming up again and again was mummy porn.
Yeah, that's,
Did you hear that one?
I've heard that quite a lot.
Mummy porn.
Yeah.
So I don't know if is mummy porn different from chick lit, and what exactly
That
does
sort
that
of
mean?
suggests a slightly older readership.
It does, doesn't
than,
it? Yeah.
Than Susie, for example. That,
Yeah, it kind of implies that mothers don't have any sexuality, you know, because it's
It's
quite
an odd
derisive,
phrase, isn't it?
you know, and that it's so derisive that it kind of puts it in. It's like, this is so, you know, it's trash, you know, it's not
And
worth
it's sexuality of desperation
Yeah.
it's
for
kind of
women who are
titillation
trapped
for
at
women
home.
kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah, you can't live this, so you experience it vicariously by reading it.
And there's no truth in that.
There's a limited amount of truth in that, I suppose.
I think that there's a certain amount of truth to the fact that it offers people a chance to live vicariously through experiences they might not have had before a world, because it's I don't know, how do you put this? There's a lot of people are very repressed and buttoned down, and the idea of saying to somebody that you love, would you mind handcuffing me to the bed this evening? They might not have done it before, so it gives them a chance to live vicariously through something. So I think there is a certain amount of truth to that.
Okay.
But I don't like the term mummy porn. I think that's quite...
Why not?
I just... Why drag mothers into it? I don't know, it kind of gives it a sort of domesticated...
Okay, we'll come back to that. I'm really enjoying this conversation. We're now going to, they're having to cut it short to go to our commercial break. So be right back with us after our break for 50 Shades of Faith, we're calling this. Hello and welcome back to Faith Matters. This is Faith Matters. We're discussing 50 Shades of Grey. You're maybe wondering whether you're on another show, I don't know. And we've got the lovely ladies here from Edge Hill University and Leeds Trinity University with us. Mary, you're a committed Christian.
Sorry, out me.
Yeah, I'm outing you now. And but should Christians read this book or see the film? Now, I'm sure, I haven't seen it, but I'm sure there have been pastors, vicars, ministers who have condemned this, and particularly in the States, I'd imagine, and also here. What do you think about that?
No one should see the film because it's awful.
Right, okay.
It's taken the texts, which of themselves I think are quite erotic in places. It's taken that erotic writing and it's just ripped the eroticism out of it. It's
Do you agree with that?
totally two-dimensional.
Well, Mary and I disagree about
Whether it's erotic.
whether it's erotic or whether it's just for like the sake of reading it. Is it a good text? Mary has found some worth in it. I think it's the worst thing that's ever been written.
There are two broad distinctions in this kind of writing: is erotic romance and erotica. As erotica, it's dreadful. So in the style of things like, for example, the work of the Marquis de Sade or the story of O, that kind of writing, it doesn't stand up. In terms of erotic romance, things like Barbara Cartland, Catherine Cookson. Although Catherine Cookson's a great writer, it's much more solid and it's much more in that vein. So that kind of the awful metaphors for sexual organs, that kind of stuff. That's all a part of that.
But I mean, the basic storyline, that young virginal girl falls in love with a mysterious older man who has serious issues.
That's a fairy tale.
And it's the story for Jane Eyre as well. I mean, there's no mad woman in the attic.
So back to my question.
Charlotte Bronte was a terrible writer too.
Should Christians be reading this?
I don't think Christians shouldn't read it. I think my kind of Christianity is an open-minded Christianity. I mean, as a Christian myself, love is what is important, whether it be between men and women or men and men or women and women. Or love should be at the heart of a marriage, for example, and the texts do end in marriage in the third volume, or at the heart of any of our sexual interactions
So this
with
ends
each
in
other.
marriage? I didn't realise
It does.
that.
Volume 3 starts with their marriage. But I don't see much love between equals, which is what God wants for all of us,
In
I
this
think,
book.
at the heart of any of these texts. But that doesn't mean that as a Christian I think people shouldn't read it. But I do think that it's not a model for life that and it's got nothing to do with the BDSM sexuality of it. It's not a model for life that a Christian would be particularly interested in following, I don't think. She spends almost all her time feeling emotionally abused outside of the bedroom by him because he's commitment phobic and he's not capable of showing real affection.
Deeply controlling.
He's deeply controlling, and that's linked by E.L. James to his childhood of abuse in ways that I don't think are helpful either to the Christian community or to the BDSM world either.
No. There's an implied assumption all the way through it that the only people who'd be interested in that kind of lifestyle in BDSM are people that would be that are severely mentally traumatised and have childhood issues, which is something that I know the BDSM community have reacted quite strongly against.
It's a nonsense.
Yeah, it's the idea you'd only enjoy that if you're a lunatic
So
yourself.
does religion feature in this at all? I'm just interested.
Well, we were having this conversation, weren't we? We can't remember a single reference to the notion of worship, to regular worship, fellowship, faith, God.
There is an inner goddess.
Yeah.
She's an inner goddess.
Yeah,
Refers
but
to
that's
herself as the inner goddess.
Dreadful.
There's a side of
That's
her
awful.
which is it's awful, but
yeah.
Okay, no church bells, no.
Nothing like that. No rejection even of faith that I can remember. Particularly,
So
it's
it's
the
kinda
god of money
it's
and
a-religious.
capitalism and the American dream, American values, that kind of stuff.
He's called Christian. I don't know if that means
Yeah, no,
anything
didn't think
to
of that.
anybody else. If that helps. And he does assume a god. She literally worships him.
Ultimately, her love saves him. This is the direction in which the texts move us.
So possibly it's idolatrous in the sense that it's
You
she
could-
worships this
it's
guy.
a redemptive affection, allegedly,
Yeah.
but
You
I
could
still
look at
don't-
it that way, I suppose. But I'm not sure that that's... But there's no explicit reference to religion that I can recall in it. Can you? No.
So Kate, you're an atheist.
I am.
And so have you got an atheist take on this as an academic or even as a person who's an atheist?
I was wondering about this on the way in, and I can't see issues within the text that would be specific for people, atheists, or why this would be an affront to people of faith or any particular issues that they would take with it, other than there is sex before marriage and you can take a lot out of it that's it's clearly quite an abusive relationship, but I don't think that that's specific to people of faith. I think that that's something that everybody
Would have a problem with.
Yeah,
would have a
take
problem and
issue
should
with,
have a
yeah.
problem with. But yeah,
Okay, so Susie, just quickly, because you haven't said a lot for a while, let's come to you. You're because I don't want you to be the student on the edge, as it were, and with your two academic friends. Susie, you're a Roman Catholic, grew up as a Roman Catholic. Murray's a Protestant, aren't you?
I'm an Anglo-Catholic.
You're now an
I don't
Anglo-Catholic.
consider myself a Protestant necessarily.
But, well, that's another show.
We'll get to that, but yeah.
As a Roman Catholic, any particular perspective on this?
I think,
What do your parents think about it?
well, my mum's read it, you
Yeah.
know, my auntie's read it, like, you know, and we've talked about it at home. And I think the issue at the heart of it is the fact that there's no love there, you know, and he's unable to kind of commit to her in any sort of meaningful way that, you know, is good and, like, you know, nourishing and, like, brings any sort of, like, joy, like, to their relationship, which I think it should be at the heart of any kind of, like, relationship like that. You know, there's nothing there, you know, that kind of, that should hold her there, that's, you know, I think is, you know, is fundamentally good, which I think is the issue with it, you know. I think that should be an issue for anybody looking at it, that it's a kind of, it's a situation where she's feeling like, you know, emotionally, out of control and, like, you know, emotionally neglected, which is so, you know, terrible. So
there might be something to be said for viewing Anastasia as kind of because she's a virgin in it, as the kind of the Madonna. She's quite literally offered up as a sacrifice to Christian in some ways.
And there are other things which you could argue, you know, are values which the Christian Church is historically associated with. So the notion of purity in women, the importance of marriage as a framework for society to get married before you have children. These are, you know, old-fashioned traditional Christian values, and these are values which are echoed by the text. Not because I think E.L. James is bringing a Christian framework to it, but because largely it's a sort of fairy tale framework. And you have to marry the handsome prince before the children arrive.
It's quite, it sounds slightly counterintuitive, but it's quite an old-fashioned text.
Yeah.
In its way. He is the breadwinner, he is the manly man, she is the woman who submits to him and ends up having 2.4 children, and they're blissfully happy.
That brings me to my next question, which is about a critique one of the feminist critiques is that this text, 50 Shades of Grey, and the film glorifies and promotes misogyny and violence against women. What do you think about that?
That's definitely the case.
That's definitely the case.
Yeah, I think so. Not necessarily because of what happens between them sexually, but because of what happens between them in their non-sexual relationship. The myriad ways he has of controlling her, of controlling where she goes, who she sees, what she eats,
what she wears,
whether she exercises, how effectively she's given contraception, etc.
If you read through any of the material about what constitutes an abusive relationship, a controlling relationship, and that's not just the man being controlling, but the woman perhaps controlling the partner as well.
So it's like a codependency.
It's a codependency, but it's severe emotional manipulation that he uses to control her. He uses his wealth to overwhelm her. He sends her books at one point that must have been tens of thousands of pounds. He buys the company that she gets a part-time job for.
This is really disturbing. She is a relatively intellectually independent student. When he meets her, he slowly narrows her life down until she works for him, in essence, and then she has his kids and stops working completely.
He tells her that who she can and she can't be friends with, not overtly, but by pointing out how nasty they all are. At one point, he puts a tracking device in her phone and follows her and turns up and saves her.
This sounds like the stuff of the tabloid press to me.
Yes, it is. And this is all what goes on outside of the bedroom. But more slightly disturbingly than that is the fact that there's this constant monologue that you get of her where she is upset at herself for his reactions to things. She spoke to a boss that he didn't like in one of the texts, and her reaction is, "Oh no, Christian's angry again." Not
she's frightened.
She's frightened of him. It's not sod off. You've got no right to tell me who I can and can't talk to. It's she internalises it all the time as her fault. She's done something wrong. He loses his rag with her when she's sunbathing topless on holiday, and again
he actually physically marks her so she can't do that again.
Right, this is sounding terrible. I mean,
but yet women and men are also women are buying it in droves, and that's something that I'm concerned by. But there's a whole.
Do you think this could lead to an increase in sexual violence in reality?
I think it has the potential to lead to a wider acceptance of it as normal.
It's normalised
by women.
I don't think that any man's going to read it and think, oh, I'm just going to go home and beat the wife up tonight. But I think that there's generations of women that are reading this and it's being presented as erotic and some kind of desirable fairy tale fantasy.
And were you shocked, Susie, by that when you read it, by that aspect of it?
Yeah, that it was. I hadn't expected that element to be in it. I thought my impression of it before reading it was, it's just going to be about BDSM, and really wasn't aware of the kind of other aspects that are so, I don't think anything is particularly shocking about what they do in the bedroom. It's what's really shocking is how he treats her and how she's, how she feels all the time, and that she's really kind of going, what's wrong with me? What have I done? Why is this is my fault? This must be something I've done, which is so kind of.
She never questions the fact that he's out of line for telling her what she can and can't do.
It's really quite, I think, damaging, and I can imagine, seeing that. Yeah.
We're going to come back to this. This is a great conversation we're having, great discussion. Don't go away at home, because this is an hour-long episode. We'll be back with the women from the universities after the break.
Well done.
Welcome back to 50 Shades of Faith on Faith Matters with Mari, Kate and Susie in the studio today, talking about 50 Shades of Grey, the book and the film. The sheer popularity, which we've spoken about already, of the book and then the film and now the sequel, or prequel, in fact it is, isn't it? It seems to indicate a widening public acceptance of sexual experimentation, of bondage, domination, sadomasochism and what have you, BDSM. Is this true, or do you think that was already there?
I think it's mainstreamed it, but I don't think it indicates that something new is happening sexually in Anglo-American culture.
No, I mean, you can trace BDSM right back to
The ancient world.
Yeah, it's always
absolutely.
nothing
Yeah, I
new
think
at
I think
all.
kind of I'm talking about a kind of widening public acceptance and by
Normalisation.
not as an organisation, but I mean people doing this in practice without getting into the details. You know, being
Yeah.
a faith show.
It's normalised it in a way.
And it wraps it up in a way that, well, it sounds like counterintuitive, but it's softer, like calling it sort of mummy porn, and that you can walk past an Ann Summers window and they've got displays of saying 50 Shades, and they've got like the accoutrements, handcuffs and things like that. It's suddenly become more accessible, more acceptable, mainstream, I think. Even funny, perhaps. I'm not sure. Susie?
Yeah, and I think people are talking about it a lot more. I mean, you know, I was saying, you know, kind of chatting to my colleagues at work, saying, you know, I'm going to, you know, go on this TV show tomorrow and talk about it, and kind of say, oh, well, I've read it and this is what I think, you know, and kind of chatting about, you know, what did they think of these kind of practices. Whereas I think before the book had come out, if you asked to kind of talk to anybody, you know, your work colleagues or your family about what they thought of BDSM, they would go, why are you asking me this, you know?
I had a really interesting conversation on a train with an 80-year-old woman who was reading it.
Of course you
And I did, it was great. And she was talking really openly about sexuality for older people. The book isn't about that, but the conversation that we had was about that.
It's a
And
vehicle, isn't it?
it was
to
fantastic,
use
yeah.
conversation. Yeah, you can use it as a way in to sort of start addressing things. I suppose that's a positive thing.
But
to
its
come out of
own
it.
message is not positive, and it does
No.
very little that's positive for men or for women.
Okay, let's just continue talking about the whole area of sexual experimentation. There are obviously clubs and groups for people who like to experiment in this kind of way. And I understand that you were telling me, Murray, there's a group for Christians or
There's
a
a Christian
society.
BDSM movement. It's largely very popular in America. It's not quite what you would imagine by that name it to be. It's not a group necessarily for practitioners of dominance and submission in sexual terms, but rather it's a way of engaging in heterosexual marriage that follows the directives of Ephesians. Is it Ephesians 5?
So it's a kind of a headship in
Wives, submit you to
submitting.
your
Yeah,
husbands.
okay, yeah.
And it can involve, I was reading some of their narratives, some of the women's narratives as part of my research for this show. It can involve practices that are traditionally BDSM practices, like spanking, corner time one husband uses with his wife.
Noticeably
He puts his wife in the
unsexual.
corner if she has transgressed him in some manner. It's wives, submit you to your husbands. So
Yeah.
if he feels she has not submitted to his will effectively, and his will is submitted to the Lord's. So that's important too in
So
the
do
Christian
you think
BDSM
that
movement.
they're just using this kind of language to reinforce a kind of quite a traditional something was actually something the
marital framework,
marital framework,
a
which actually the
non-sexual
church-
one by and
yeah.
large, I think, from what I've read, from the little I've read about it.
I think the BDSM community would take quite a lot of offence
So
to that.
nothing to do with leather and whips and all that kind of thing.
No, I mean, that's not to say that some people who practice Christian BDSM couldn't also get involved in that kind of sex life, but that Christian BDSM is about submitting your will to your man's and your man submitting his to God's.
So have you, out of interest, I mean, we obviously don't need names or anything, but have you met anybody who from the Christian community that is involved in this kind of world?
I haven't, no.
Because I know when we were planning this show, we were going to try and get somebody
Yeah,
on, but couldn't find anyone.
That fell pretty. It's really very popular in America, a movement that identifies itself specifically as Christian BDSM. But I do know couples who live like this in this country. They wouldn't call themselves Christian BDSMers, but I do know heterosexual married couples who are Christians.
Who are people of faith.
Are people of faith who are very traditional in terms of the framework that they engage in terms of power relations.
Okay. So we've talked about, the negative aspects of the book. How do you think the church should be addressing these and responding to this? I mean, often the church is very reactive, So, there was a big debate around Harry Potter years ago that,
Witchcraft.
which came around witchcraft, which was, don't let your kids read this book,
I don't think I'd let them read 50 Shades of Grey either, to be completely...
Until they were over 18.
It's not for children, okay,
No.
but for adults, how do you think the church should respond? Any of you, really?
That's probably
That's out of your...
slightly out of my frame of reference, that one, but I imagine it would be the morality and the central relationship that they would have something to comment about, if anything.
There have been some responses on the part of groups that are associated with the church, not one official homogenous response from the Protestant Church or from the Church of England or from the Catholic Church per se, but for example, the Bible Society was contacted for a comment when a particular hotel decided to replace all its copies of the Gideon Bible with a copy of 50 Shades of Grey.
Really?
Yeah. And I believe it was Rachel Rounds from the Bible Society who engaged with it and argued that the Bible is a much more enduring and better written text, which also engages with these kinds of themes. For example, the Song of Songs or Song of Solomon, which engages with this.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, expand on that. Because our viewers may not be familiar with the arguments around that, or just around Song of Songs, Song of Solomon.
Well, I was raised by my father, who was a preacher, Reverend William Hughes Edwards, who always taught me that the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon, which is a very sexual and pornographic text really within the Bible, was a metaphor, he told me very strongly.
Yeah.
It's a metaphor for Christ's relationship to the church. But I was talking to some priest friends of mine in preparation for this, and they said, no, it's porn. It's gorgeous, in essence. It's beautiful.
Well, it's erotic rather
There's
than
nothing
porn.
wrong with an erotic or pornographic construction of sex between men and women, or men and men, or women and women.
I mean, is there anything in religious scripture about not enjoying sex?
The Bible doesn't condemn sexuality.
Doesn't condemn it, does it? No,
no.
it's between, as long as there's love at its centrepiece. I mean, I know that there were saints and people that were writing later, Saint Jerome and people like that, that said that pleasure was a bad thing, but I think that largely Christian doctrine, it doesn't admonish pleasure,
that
does it?
stuff came in later.
Much
I think
later,
Augustine
yeah.
was responsible. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. And he brought in his baggage, didn't he? And others brought in later church fathers and commentators. I mean, we bring our baggage, don't we, to this whole area.
And quite
debate.
often men like that, and also men like Aelred of Rievaulx, who wrote one of my anchoritic texts that I did quite a lot of work on for my PhD, engaged in lives that were fairly debauched themselves, and then came to God and realised that they hadn't been living in a way that was consistent with their bodies being, if you like, a temple unto the Lord, or consistent in a way consistent with their own integrity, and so they then spent the remainder of their lives trying to encourage other people not to make the same mistakes they'd made. And on some level, their writings are admirable in that context, but there's nothing wrong with passion or the expression of sexual desire per se.
I've always read the Song of Solomon as a celebration of sex. And
You've read it as well?
Oh, I've read it, yeah, absolutely. And it struck me straight away that it was about sex. I didn't read it as a metaphor at all. I thought it was
My
a
father
way
was
of,
very anxious that we read it as a metaphor.
I read it as a way of worshipping God through sex.
Interesting.
There's nothing wrong with the body.
No.
There's a lot of guilt around in the church.
Yeah.
Susie, coming to you again. You know, raised as a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's true for Protestants as well. But
Yeah.
this whole thing of Catholic guilt.
Yeah.
Did that affect your reading of this text, or are you sufficiently removed from that?
I think I'm more removed from it, and talking about like the Song of Solomon, Song of Songs. Like my mum always said, it's an erotic bit of the Bible, and there's no other way to read it. You can't look at it any other sort of way. So I think the kind of sex in 50 Shades of Grey and whatever they do, whatever they practice that is sexual, it bother me. It doesn't bother me anywhere else, because I don't see it as something that, it's the other part that is bothersome, about how he treats her, which is so much more unpleasant, the big issue in the text.
There's going to be a divide between Christians who read this text, between those people who believe that sex should not be engaged in before marriage, because 2 of the 3 books are premarital.
I'm very interested.
There are 3
the
books
last
and then
ones.
the new book, obviously. But the 3 books, the original trilogy, the first 2 texts take place before they get married, do they not?
But then Christians read loads of books and watch loads of films in which there's sex before marriage. I mean, these days, you wouldn't read anything or watch anything.
Sex before marriage, sex without real love, sex that results in pain.
Though the characters would say that they love each other. I think she certainly
She
loves
loves
him.
him.
And by the end of it, he
Apparently
loves her. Although it is one of the largest reasons that people don't leave abusive relationships is because they believe that they love that person. They love the abuser.
There's not much erotic arousal at the heart of their BDSM relationship for her, however, and perhaps the feminist literary world would have found it easier to critique the text in a less damning way if she had come to the relationship wanting a BDSM relationship, consenting to it freely, and actually finding an arousal at the heart of that, which arguably there is none really.
No.
It's for him on his terms, and it reads very one-sided, and ultimately she cures him of his desire to engage in this kind of sexuality by making him a family man.
Okay, we'll come back to these themes for our final part after the commercial break. Oh, welcome back to 50 Shades of Faith, where we're looking at the text, the book and the film 50 Shades of Grey, with three academics from Edge Hill University, Leeds Trinity, and a former student, Susie, from Edge Hill University. Great to have you with us. We want to really push the boat out with Faith Matters in terms of asking these kind of questions from a faith perspective. So if you've got any ideas, try emailing us at faithmatters@baytvliverpool.com. We'd love to hear from you and your ideas and suggestions of who might come onto the show. Okay, before the break, we were talking about faith communities and the response of faith communities, churches, to this whole phenomena, as it's been described, as Kate has described it, of 50 Shades of Grey. In America, there is actually a church called the XXX Church, which is a ministry to the porn industry. Is there a connection between, firstly, is there a connection between 50 Shades of Grey and the porn industry? And secondly, what do you think about that as an idea of a mission, a church for the porn industry? What, is there a connection between, I mean, you talked about porn. What's the difference between porn and erotica?
The porn industry exists to facilitate, stoke and make money on the basis of arousal, sexual arousal, and on some level, so 50 Shades of Grey, the texts, the film,
does that.
Is intended to do that. That's what the erotic romance genre, which I would argue it's written in the style of, is kind of principally intended to do. However, a lot of the readers of 50 Shades of Grey that I've interviewed have experienced increasing boredom with the sexually erotic scenes and an increased interest in the romance storyline. So much so that people are skipping the sex bits and moving just to the story to find out how that pans out.
That's men as well as women, you think?
They get incredibly repetitive.
Yeah.
It's just, you're just reading through it, just going, oh, they're having sex
again. It does get repetitive, but also it's as if it doesn't appear, the way the text isn't really intended to hook you on that level. Yeah. The romance is the thing, and the relationship between them.
Yeah, the relationship is what's meant to hook you
I don't think that happens with porn, where the backstory is quite often, minimal at best.
So it's the romance, Susie, that gets you?
Well, it didn't get me, but I think, I speak to my friends who read it and other people who said, I was just skipping through the sex scenes. They were kind of boring. I felt like I'd read them before. It wasn't interesting. It wasn't, and, I wanted to know what was happening with them. Where was the story going to go? What was she doing? So that, that was what really drove it for the people who were reading it that I spoke to,
I mean, we were talking about Song of Songs, and I mean, I think somebody here, one of you described it as porn.
Me.
It's been described to me, I come from a place where, I've heard that argument about whether it's a metaphor or not. And that's now discounted really by theologians. And most theologians might use the term erotica or erotic literature. What's the difference between erotica and porn? Is one acceptable and one non-acceptable, or what is
pornography,
the
I think, exists to stoke arousal at the most basic of levels, doesn't it? And erotica is a more cerebral response, a more narrative response to
I think it's what's the difference between pornography and art? And someone once said staples, but I suppose erotica is it's more involved in a narrative, and it kind of gives you a situation context, whereas porn can literally just be an image.
The act.
Can't
I
it
don't
be
think
act?
it's got much relationship to pornography, really. But I'm interested in this XXX church that you're talking
Yeah, you've
about.
not heard of that before.
I hadn't heard of it before. Although memory stirs the idea of a church for porn workers.
Yeah, they
in
go. I think they
essence,
go
the
to.
memory
There's big
stirs.
exhibitions in the States, probably over here as well.
Would
for
that
porn
be
industry.
because they feel excluded from regular churches because of what they do? Is there?
I mean, it's not probably the sort of thing you could talk about.
No, I suppose
can't
not.
imagine it would be. You know, you wouldn't go to church and say, I'm a sex worker. You know,
No.
that's not something.
That's
you
a
know,
real shame and a
Yeah.
massive
Yeah.
indictment of the church.
Well,
We've
given
got to
that,
change that.
one of Jesus' closest followers
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
reputed to be a sex worker, Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, I think that would be a real shame if they felt the need to have that church because they felt excluded from other churches. Although maybe it gives them a sense of identity and
Church
in their
has
own
got
faith.
to meet
I'm not
people
sure.
on their own wavelength.
I think
Got
it
to meet
may
people where
have
they are.
something to do with, which plays into this whole debate really, is that, these are places that the church won't go because they're not just risque, they're risky. They're risky places. And
Well, it's time for the church to get risky.
yeah, which is what XXX movement is, so I've read about it in American magazines, Christian magazines, and it's put across these guys are taking, and they are guys actually doing it, these two pastors I think that start, they're taking a tremendous risk going into this community, and I'm thinking, well, surely these are the kind of people that Jesus kind of spent time with. And
Is the idea to save people from the industry though? Because
think
I'd be a bit concerned by
Yeah,
that.
I don't
I think
like
it probably is
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
I don't like the
Okay.
idea of demonising people.
So
because
what's
they,
your concern about that?
I don't think that we should assume that people who work in the sex industry, on whatever level they do, are in need of saving. I think that perhaps what we need is a more open approach to it, where that choice, if it is a choice, and I'm well aware that people don't sometimes have a choice, but if it is a choice, then that needs to be respected. And if faith comes into it, if they are people of faith, then that needs to be addressed on that level, rather than looking at it and thinking, well, this is clearly somebody who is in need of help.
There's no doubting that some areas, particularly of the porn industry, are extremely reductive, negative and damaging
exploitative.
and exploitative
ultimately,
massively. But that doesn't mean that the whole process of pornographic arousal needs to be condemned outright. There are pro-porn feminists, for sure.
Yeah, and I think perhaps
And there's
it's...
feminist pornography too.
Yeah, it stems from a sort of a viewpoint that sex is inherently morally bad, unless it's within the confines of a marriage
So
contract.
I mean, I know you're an atheist and you're speaking from an atheist perspective, but from a Christian perspective, maybe what we're saying is that, people in the porn industry don't need saving any more than anyone else.
Yeah.
We do believe in salvation, but I think what the church tends to do is sort of put people in categories. These are the really bad people, they're into really bad stuff.
And that's really worrying.
So, yeah, that, if that's what it is about, which we can't condemn it, I don't think, for that, because none of us really know too much about it. That wouldn't be a good thing. But reaching out to people and trying to help them. I know in Liverpool there's some great people who go out of an evening.
I was thinking about the street pastors.
Well, there's street pastors, but there's another group of people, I think they're from Frontline Church, who go out and minister to the sex workers in Liverpool and do great stuff in terms of helping them, and in a totally non-condemnatory way. In that's a positive. Would you say that's a positive thing, isn't it?
I would, because I think the industries do need to be made safer for people to use them if they wish to use them. Both those who are involved in working in them and those who are involved in using them.
I mean, offering help to people that are in need of it and in need of comfort can only be a positive thing. But I think that what needs to be done is not to assume that people in that industry need help. That's where it gets...
That's nicely put, yeah.
And coming to church, ultimately, it should be a safe space for people. And it doesn't matter if you're a sex worker coming to church; it should be a safe space for you to enter and not feel like you're being judged or condemned. And that you're welcome.
And a safe space for people to talk about stuff. Because, I mean, there would be people, I think, who possibly watching this today even, who think, gosh, Hitchman's really, he's gone to the edge.
Good for you.
Today. He's discussing this stuff without. I haven't got a red face, have I?
No, you're
without,
fine.
even without a red face. So, but I mean, I believe that we should be discussing, particularly something as a phenomenon such as this.
Well, it's happening, isn't it?
It is happening.
There's no point. All we're doing by not talking about it is adopting a la approach.
Yeah.
It's not helping anybody. But not by talking about it doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means that we're ignoring it.
The church has got to stay relevant.
Yeah,
It's got to make itself relevant and meet people where people are, I think.
Okay, before we finish, I just want to touch on the new book, Grey. Tell us about that. What's the perspective there, written from a male perspective?
I knew this was coming because at the end of the third text in the trilogy that she released in 2012, 2012,
I think.
There was a section written in the style of Christian Grey that covered some of the territory she'd already written about. And I've long thought she's going to rewrite the whole thing from his take. So obviously the original trilogy is Anastasia Steele's narration. So now she's written Grey, which is a text that rewrites just the first volume, 50 Shades of Grey, from Christian Grey's perspective and gives us his inner thoughts.
Oh, and what's it like? Is it good?
Well, Susie has been.
Susie, what do you think?
I was reading
Susie
sections
tells
to her
what
in
you
the
think,
car
yeah.
on the way here, and we were just kind of laughing. And I mean, I don't want to slate the book, you know, saying, you know, it's trashy, because I don't really see the difference between 50 Shades of Grey and, you know, Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre. You know, we can look at it all on the same level as, you know, being like an English literature student. Like, I can look at that. I can
Romance text.
Yeah, I can read them all on the same, you know, on the same level. So, but it's you know, I don't find there's anything redeeming. Like, I don't feel sorry for him. You know, I don't like him.
You were saying as well that you didn't find the narrative believable because it's written from a male point of view.
Yeah, and I didn't think she was great at writing a feminine point of view, but she's even worse at a masculine.
She's got his register wrong, I
Yeah.
think, at times. His internal monologue is extremely profane. His external one in this text isn't. And the two are going on at the same time. And I think she's misread her own creation.
Okay, we'll come to the end now. You know, I'd love to go on and talk to you more, and we will, I'm sure, when the
Invite
cameras.
us back.
And we invite you back to talk about something else. Thank you so much for coming in today and being such entertaining guests.
Thank
and,
you.
A pleasure.
Bless you. And thank you to our viewers, and see you next time.